I look forward to the day where we have these like treatment centers where people can go and have this like guided experience to process whatever it is they need to process.
Yeah.
I do truly believe that these psychedelics or magic mushrooms or whatever it is that they legalize is going to be the future of mental health care, especially for these more severe cases of mental health issues.
Billy, thank you so much for joining me, man. We connected, for those that are listening, just to get a better idea of, how we met and how we got connected, probably about a year ago through mutual friends, with the shared interest and commonality of mental health and mental wellness, and just being really deeply fascinated with what you're up to with your company, Blossom. So yeah, I'm just excited to have this conversation today.
Yeah, and you've kind of been a part of it since the beginning. I think when we were doing R&D on these lattes, you had actually tried the golden milk. But yeah, happy to be here. Appreciate your hospitality. I brought some of our cacao latte.
Sweet. Let's get into it. Let's have some.
A fan favorite as of late, especially as the weather starts to turn here.
I love it.
It's going to be like a little caffeinated chocolate milk. Or hot chocolate.
What flavor is this?
This is the cacao.
Cacao, love that.
So it's raw cacao, a little bit of vanilla bean powder, a touch of maple syrup, and oat milk, and then our superfoods, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about.
Heck yeah. I'm excited to enjoy this. Cheers. That's good.
It's got 40 times the antioxidants of blueberries. Similar anti-inflammatory properties as turmeric, and then it's rich in fiber, magnesium, and iron, which you typically wouldn't get with your average cup of hot chocolate.
Whoa. Say it again. 40 times what of blueberries?
40 times the antioxidants of a serving of blueberries.
Wow.
And then fiber, magnesium, iron, and raw cacao has similar anti-inflammatory properties to like a serving of turmeric.
Yeah, I'm familiar with cacao a little bit. I know it's a big thing in actually the breathwork community. A lot of people will offer that at like breathwork classes and sessions, typically before doing breathwork. It's known as like a heart opening, I guess, like plant in terms of just opening up the capillaries, and it's cool to see it like being used in what you're offering here with Blossom.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's used in like ceremonies. I mean, there's all types of ceremonies, matcha ceremonies in Japan. In Peru, it's cacao ceremonies. In some other parts of South America, it's like ayahuasca ceremonies. But by itself, it's very, very medicinal, obviously nutrient dense, but more than that, it's super delicious.
Yeah, love it. And it's absolutely delicious. Like I can attest to that. And I'm not just saying that because we're buddies. Like this is actually a really, really good tasting product.
I love to hear it.
Yeah, man. I want to hear a little bit more about your story of how you started Blossom. And I'm sure you'll have opportunities throughout our conversation, woven in and out of conversation on a little bit more about what Blossom is as a company, the products that you have. But I want to start off hearing more about how this all got started. Like if you can share a little bit more about your backstory.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, kind of the theme of my life, I've lived 25 years and dealt with like a lot of mental health issues. I mean, starting at the age of, third grade, I was dealing with a ton of separation anxiety and I'll preface this with saying, like, I come from a great family. My parents love me. I have no reason to think the way that I had, but I had the separation anxiety, this fear that my parents were just going to drop me off and leave me somewhere. And so it struggled to go to hockey practice, to school, to overnight camp, because I just had this like painful fear. And therapy ultimately helped me overcome that. A few years later, I'm navigating puberty and I'm starting to deal with social anxiety, and I developed this fear of presentations, public speaking. I can't speak in front of a group more than 5 people. And ultimately just practice helped me navigate that. Starting small, talking in front of a few people, and then slowly growing. And now I'm happy to say that I no longer have that fear. A few years later, I have my first girlfriend and we have a devastating breakup. I'm heartbroken and I go spiraling into a depression. I gain 25 pounds. I lose all my confidence. I'm super lethargic all the time. And ultimately, exercise helped me overcome that. And then as I grew a little bit older and kind of the spark of wintertime kind of faded, I no longer enjoyed making snowmen and whatnot.
Right.
And I started to develop like the seasonal depression.
So this is when you were young. Like how old do you think you were?
This is like high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many teenagers face that, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And especially here in Chicago when the sun goes away for 30 days at a time. And ultimately, I started taking vitamin D supplements, and that kind of helped me navigate that a bit.
Mm.
And then going into my senior year of high school, I just didn't feel like myself.
Yeah.
I was constantly lethargic. I dealt with crippling anxiety over nothing in particular. I was just anxious all of the time.
Wow.
And that would ultimately keep me up at night, wake up, and I'd have 5 cups of coffee just to get through the day, just to keep my eyes open. And I dealt with horrible brain fog. My memory was terrible. I was constantly forgetting things, people's birthdays, losing things. And so those symptoms continued to get worse and worse and worse over the course of 12 months. And then I was like, you know what? I need to go see a doctor and get this figured out. And my doctor tells me, you know what? You could be depressed. And I was like, well, I've got nothing to be depressed about. And he was like, oftentimes people who deal with depression are not depressed about any one thing in particular.
Mm.
So he recommended I see a psychiatrist, and that doctor put me on medication, and the first medication didn't work at all. Second medication worked a little bit, but it came with a slew of negative side effects. And then he put me on a third medication, and it was similar. Some relief, but the side effects far outweighed the minimal relief that I was offered. And then he was like, you know what? You might just be treatment resistant. You might have treatment resistant depression.
When you say medication, you mean SSRIs?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it was Prozac, Wellbutrin, and then there was one other that I'm blanking on. And so he tells me you might be treatment resistant. And so I was forced with either, okay, I live with this, which would be horrible,
Yeah.
or I find an alternative approach. And I was raised in a family that kind of thought alternative medicine was like snake oil.
Yeah.
But I thought begrudgingly, I thought I'd give it a shot. You know, what's the worst that could happen? So I started seeing this alternative medicine doctor, and I tell him my whole story and what this doctor told me about being treatment resistant. And he tells me, you're not treatment resistant. Your doctor is just resistant to using other treatments.
Yeah.
And he continued to perform some tests on me. He tested my adrenals, and he told me that I had adrenal fatigue. That's not something that your average doctor would tell you.
Yep.
And so he recommends me a combination of some amino acids, L-theanine, GABA, as well as an adaptogen, ashwagandha. These are all very familiar things these days in the supplement aisle. And literally within weeks, I had felt better than I had in years. And so alternative medicine saved me again.
Wow.
Now, fast forward a few years later, I'm 22 years old, and I get a call from my mom that my father had passed away.
Oh, wow.
And he had passed away in his sleep to a heart attack. And no one had expected it. I mean, he was a little bit overweight. He wasn't the healthiest guy, but he was 61 years old.
Yeah.
And the way that I described losing a parent, especially at a young age, to someone who hasn't lost a parent is it's like losing your 2 legs. They're amputated, and you have to reteach yourself how to walk.
Wow.
So the following 6 months, like the only thing that like kept me moving was just like trying to make my dad proud. But aside from that, I was bedridden. I was just morbidly depressed. And I live by the rule of 3. So if I hear something 3 times, there's got to be something there. So I kept hearing about the role that psilocybin or magic mushrooms can play in addiction, in depression, and in processing grief. So I pick up Michael Pollan's notorious book, How to Change Your Mind. And after reading it front to back, I committed myself to having one of these experiences. And I learned the importance of setting, and having an intention.
Yep.
And so I get my hands on some of these mushrooms, and I sit in a field and I take these mushrooms, and the experience for the most part is ineffable. It's hard to put into words, but my one takeaway was this vision that I had, that I was sitting across from a table somewhat like this with my dad. And my dad tells me, he says, I know it's hard to understand why I was taken from you at such a young age, but the reality is I can do so much more for you from up here than I can from down there.
Whoa.
It sounds very cliche. Some people can write it up as just like a dream and what have you. But I left that trip. I went into it feeling like I had 2 broken legs, and I left feeling like I had wings. And
Dude.
as soon as I came home, my friends, my family were like, "What changed? Like, you're a completely different person." My friends, my family are all still grieving, and here I am just as optimistic as can be.
Wow.
And so
That was from one experience?
From one experience,
Yeah.
about 3.5 grams
Wow.
of mushrooms.
Yeah.
And so the theme throughout my mental health journey is that these conventional approaches, SSRIs and seeing a psychiatrist, just didn't work for me like alternative medicine did.
Sure.
So I left all of those experiences kind of feeling like my why in life was to promote and educate natural tools for mental health. And I was left wondering 2 things after all those experiences. Why isn't plant medicine plan A instead of plan B? Because it's oftentimes just as effective, in some cases even more effective than conventional approaches, without the slew of negative side effects. And the second thing I was wondering was, why don't we take things for our mental health or do things for our mental health like we do our physical health? You know, we'll go to the gym to get big muscles, or we'll take some immunity supplements to support our immune system. But what are we doing to support our adrenal glands, our nervous system, et cetera, et cetera? So that's kind of the journey in a nutshell.
Dude, it's so true. And I think we're finally starting to get around this idea of mental health is so tied in and connected with our physical health and vice versa.
Absolutely.
You know, and it seemed like maybe when we were growing up, there was stigma when it came to mental health. And it was like a division between the two, right? You would focus on your physical health, and then mental health was like this totally separate thing that you would either neglect or only focus on if you were like desperate to focus on it.
Yeah.
And I think now we're starting to realize that the two are so connected, and there are so many ways to live in that lifestyle to make sure you're taking care of both.
Absolutely.
It's not just one or the other. So that's something I've been noticing, I think, over the last several years, that we've made huge leaps and bounds to remove that stigma, but then also to put an emphasis on like that holistic approach of nutrition, exercise, mental health, just a whole bunch of tools and resources to focus on that mental wellness and make it a full package, a holistic approach. So
I talk to a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists, typically from like the holistic alternative side.
yeah,
And they all preach about this like mental wellness lifestyle. And we can talk a little bit more about this later on, but it's these 5, maybe 6 pillars. It's nutrition, exercise, community, mindfulness, sleep. And in some cases, they preach about purpose.
Yep.
And I live by the theory that if you can do majority of those things on a day-to-day basis, then you're living mentally well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also what I've found for myself in terms of like my own health journey. You get so much advice and information in the health space. Like, you got to do this, you got to work out, you got to get 8 hours of sleep, you got to eat this way and eat these foods and meditate and do breath work. And it's overwhelming, especially for someone new or like in the beginning of their health journey. They're like, oh my God, I listened to all these different podcasts and YouTube videos and books, and they're recommending a million different things. Where do I start?
Yeah.
And I found that like you just put one foot in front of the other, and as long as you're consistent on a few things that work for you, you don't have to overwhelm yourself with like everything. Like, just get started as one step.
Start small.
Build that block and then build on top of it. It's like a snowball effect. Like, just roll it down the hill and find what works for you over time.
And with like exercise in particular, it's like the studies show you don't need to be working out 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't need this big gym membership where you're around all these bodybuilders and whatnot.
Yep.
It's as simple as 15 to 20 minutes a day, 4 days a week of just movement, whether it be walking, yoga, lifting weights, biking, whatever the case may be, whatever you enjoy doing, just do that consistently.
What are some things you enjoy for movement? Like, what are some things you find yourself doing throughout the week?
Yeah, I think running and biking puts my mind like in complete check. I like to start my day with something like that.
That's nice.
I do a little bit of weightlifting, and then I practice yoga once or twice a week, and it's like the highlight of my week every week.
There's a few things I want to talk about there. So you mentioned running and biking. I find those two to be, I mean, they're pretty similar in terms of what you're doing with like cardio, right? They're both cardio type of movements, but when it comes to running, I find myself, I do love to run, but it's very easy for me to constantly be thinking while I'm running, right? Like my mind is just racing, like literally racing with thoughts. When I'm biking, especially in the city, as you know, like there's people everywhere. You have to be really locked in.
Yeah.
So with running, I find myself my mind wanders more. And with biking, it's like almost meditative where and maybe meditative isn't the right word, but flow state, focus, right? Mindfulness. You have to be really locked into your surroundings. I'm not really thinking about anything else. Yeah. Whereas running is just like a little bit more free form. I can be like, oh, I'm working on this project, or I have this meeting tomorrow. I got to remember to call this person. Biking, I'm just like, you're focusing on what's in front of you. Yeah. Otherwise, you could hit somebody. You could get,
I think it depends a lot on where you're biking. You know, on the streets of Chicago, it's one thing when a bus can just swerve out in front of you.
Exactly.
I try to hit the lakefront or some trails where all I have to kind of navigate is the biker in front of me or that runner or walker. But I get what you're saying, where running or biking for me, it's kind of like it's when I like get to organize my thoughts. So I think it's often productive. I try not to run with music or podcasts or anything like that. It's just kind of organizing and clearing my mind.
Yeah. The reason why that came up, I was listening to Mark Zuckerberg when he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and they were talking about his, exercise routine. And Zuck was talking about how he used to love running. And then after a while, he was like, man, I started realizing like how much I can be in my own head when I run. And now lately he's been surfing. Yeah. And he's like, when I'm surfing, dude, you don't think about anything else. Like you are just on that board and you're looking at the wave and you're in that flow state. You can't think about a meeting or any of the pressure that somebody like Zuck would have to think about. So
that's yoga for me.
That's yoga for you. Yeah.
I walk in, I put my phone down, I lay on my mat, and for the next hour, nothing exists besides that practice. And I walk out of there with a completely clear mind.
Love it. So you started talking about your story a little bit, and then we deviated a little bit. So where were you at in terms of, I think your early 20s, you had this psilocybin experience that helped you navigate the pains and grief of losing a parent.
Yeah.
And you started to see the power behind all of that in terms of healing. Where'd you go from there? That was like your early 20s, right? Was when you...
Yeah, that was 2018 when I had that experience.
Wow.
And so I was kind of just living as I was, kind of trying to build a career at the time in the cannabis space. But constantly researching cannabis is a tool for mental health. Psilocybin is a tool for mental health. Some of these other plant molecules like amino acids and adaptogens. So I was absorbed by that research and that passion that I had. And then when COVID came around, I came across an alarming statistic that said 7 out of 10 people were dealing with at least one symptom of mental illness. And the most prevalent symptoms were mental burnout, anxiety, chronic stress, and just an inability to focus. And these symptoms were affecting younger generations more than older generations. And when I say that, there's like an asterisk in there because older generations are typically less likely to open up about their mental health experiences.
True.
But they also have the experience under their belt where it's like, they went through 9/11. They went through all these other catastrophes, and they recognize that this too shall pass.
Right.
But for someone who's in high school or college and their senior year is stripped out from under them, and
COVID was like the first big challenge they faced.
Exactly. They're like, "What's next? Is the world?"
Yeah.
And so that's when I was like, okay, is there something that I can do here? And I did some more research to try and understand like why so many people were suffering and not getting some support.
Yeah.
And I learned that the two issues facing the mental health crisis were access and efficacy. With access, we're short 60,000 psychiatrists and over 200,000 psychologists. So demand for their services far outweighs supply. And now, if you are lucky enough to get support, or get access to their services, and you get medicated. Current medications, these SSRIs, are only effective in just 1 in 3 people.
Wow.
100% effective in 1 in 3 people. Some relief, but not complete remission to another 1 in 3 people. And then, like me, they leave another 1 in 3 people completely treatment resistant.
Wow. Okay, I want to review that again. So, out of 1 of 3 people, it's completely effective for 1 out of 3, right?
Yeah.
So as you say that, like what's coming to mind is, of course, like neither of us are ever going to tell people to get off their medication, their SSRIs. Like it could be working for you, right? So if it is, that's great. Like it's not
Absolutely.
necessarily a negative thing. So it could be working for 1 out of 3 people. What's the other 2/3?
Then 1 in 3 people find some relief.
Some relief. Okay.
But not complete remission.
Yep.
And then 1 in 3 people find no relief at all.
Like yourself. Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
So the issue there is that this mental health system, for the most part, has this one tool, these medications.
And it seems like there's a narrative for mental health that like, if you are in need of this, like this is the answer, right? Like medication is the only thing you can use.
Exactly. So I'm not trying to sit here and preach like, get off your medicine, try natural medicine instead.
You're saying there's other ways for some people.
If it works for you, great. But you should know that there are alternatives in the event that it doesn't.
Right.
And now, okay, you're like me and it didn't work for you. Now you're seeking alternative care.
Yeah.
There are even less holistic or functional psychiatrists than there are conventional. And if you are lucky enough to find one and they have time for you, their services and the products that they offer you are all going to be out of pocket, which can be $300+ an hour.
Yeah.
So for the average person, that's not feasible.
Right.
So knowing all of that, I was like, how can we kind of bridge this gap here? How can we kind of open access to these therapies to those people that are suffering? And so I looked at it, the first kind of vision was via products. Products using clinically proven levels of clinically effective superfoods to support people's mental well-being. So we started talking to holistic psychiatrists to determine what are some of the most effective superfoods for mental burnout or sustained energy, for focus, and for just managing feelings of stress and anxiety, whether you're in the heat of it or whether you're kind of just trying to support your body's nervous system. So we had dozens of conversations, combed through probably hundreds of clinical studies, and the 3 superfoods that we settled on were guarana for sustained energy and mental burnout, L-theanine / caffeine for focus, and GABA, specifically pharma-GABA from kimchi for stress and anxiety.
Okay.
So guarana, you're probably familiar with it from energy drinks and whatnot. I think it's in like Monster and Red Bull, but it is a seed kind of similar to coffee from Brazil.
Okay.
But per gram, it has about 4 times as much caffeine as a gram of coffee.
Wow.
But the caffeine is more similar to that of green tea than it is of coffee, where it's kind of slower releasing, longer lasting. So with coffee, you might feel like you got shot out of a cannon, and then a few hours later, your energy starts to dwindle and you reach for a second cup and then a third cup. With guarana, it's kind of more of a subtle come up, and then you don't really experience a crash. So the research that we've seen shows that it can provide 6 to 9 hours of energy versus 3 to 4 with coffee.
Yeah. Doesn't have that huge crash then.
Exactly. So we use 75 milligrams of guarana and then some caffeine from green tea as well. So it comes out to about 100 milligrams of caffeine. And then next was L-theanine. So L-theanine, we see it in a lot of places these days. It's an amino acid from green tea and some types of mushrooms. And it's often recommended in combination with caffeine, 2-to-1 ratio of L-theanine to caffeine, as a tool for ADD and ADHD. So kind of like a natural alternative to Adderall.
Yeah.
And what the research on that ratio has found is that it can boost alertness and it can reduce your susceptibility to distraction. So there's some rigorous research on that duo. And then, so we use 100 milligrams of caffeine to 200 milligrams of L-theanine. And my favorite ingredient in here is GABA. So GABA, kind of like melatonin,
Yep.
is both produced by your body naturally as
Okay.
well as found in nature. So naturally in your body, it functions as a neurotransmitter, so kind of like a chemical messenger in your brain. And it's what gives you kind of that like zen, relaxed, stress-free kind of feeling. So then there's GABA, probably my favorite superfood in this mix. And GABA, like melatonin, is produced naturally in your body and also found in nature. So naturally in your body, it functions as a neurotransmitter. It's kind of like one of the chemical messengers in your brain.
Yeah.
And when your GABA levels are high, it's what gives you that like stress-free kind of zen feeling when you're relaxing or winding down. And now when you find it in nature or in supplement form, oftentimes people will tell you, oh, GABA doesn't work, it's ineffective, it doesn't pass your body's blood-brain barrier.
Okay.
And in the case of synthetic GABA, that is true. So there's two types of supplemental GABA. There's natural GABA, often described as pharma GABA. It's like the trademarked brand it's extracted from kimchi.
Okay. What's kimchi?
Kimchi is like a fermented food.
Got it.
So it's a bunch of fermented vegetables.
Okay.
And so this pharma GABA is extracted from the probiotic bacteria in kimchi.
And where can kimchi be found? Is that
so it's just a mix of vegetables, and then this bacteria can be a bunch of different recipes.
Okay.
And then you let it ferment almost like kombucha.
Got it.
And then you take the bacteria and you extract the pharma GABA from there, and you've got this pharma GABA supplement that's like 88% pure GABA.
Got it.
So that's natural GABA, which I'll refer to as pharma GABA. And then there's synthetic GABA. Synthetic GABA is made in a lab, and the molecules are too big to pass your body's blood-brain barrier.
When it's synthesized?
When it's synthesized,
Got
exactly. So you can take higher amounts, and they can pass through your gut-brain barrier. But the issue is that it often leads to side effects like drowsiness or dizziness. So whereas on the flip side, pharma GABA, it can pass your body's blood-brain barrier and your body's gut-brain barrier. And the studies on pharma GABA are quite profound. There have been a couple studies that I often reference. There was this one that they did on a bunch of people who had a fear of heights. So they take this group of people, they separate them into two groups, the placebo group and the pharma GABA group, and they measure their baseline stress hormone levels, their cortisol. And then they administer the placebo and the pharma GABA. They gave them about 100 milligrams. And then they have them cross this 250-foot bridge spanning this canyon. So pretty gut-wrenching for someone with a fear of heights. And then halfway across the bridge, the researchers stop them and they say, okay, I'm going to come out there and I'm going to measure your cortisol levels again. And what they found was that the group that took the placebo had a 20% spike in stress hormones, while the group that took GABA had a 20% reduction in their stress hormones. And this is within just an hour of ingesting. So very, very fast acting.
So within an hour of digesting, say that again, 20%?
Within an hour of ingesting the pharma GABA or the placebo, the group that took the placebo had a 20% spike in cortisol. And the group that took GABA had a 20% reduction. So a whopping 40% difference.
Wow.
And so then the researchers concluded that the group that took GABA, though they were facing their biggest fear, their physiological response was as though they were calm and relaxed.
That's wild.
Profound. And then this other study, it's helpful to kind of understand brain waves before we dive into it.
Sure.
They were measuring GABA versus L-theanine versus placebo's effects on your body's brain waves.
Okay.
And they used an EEG to measure that. So with brain waves, there's 4 types. There's delta and theta, which often occur when you're sleeping. And then there's beta brain waves, which occur when you're kind of stressed, frantic, you get a call that your dad just died. And then there's alpha brainwaves. So alpha brainwaves are when you're in like a calm, kind of focused flow state. This is something that many of us like aspire to be in throughout the day. So you want to reduce your beta brainwaves and you want to increase your alpha brainwaves however you can. And this often happens during meditation or yoga or even exercise. It can boost your body's alpha brainwaves. So they give one group placebo, one group 200 milligrams of L-theanine, and one group the 100 milligrams of this pharma GABA.
Okay.
And within 5 minutes, they start measuring their EEG scans, so their brainwaves. And they determined that the highest ratio of alpha to beta brainwaves occurred with the GABA, the group that took 100 milligrams of pharma GABA.
Wow.
So just goes to show that not only can this be a helpful amino acid for reducing your body's stress hormones, your cortisol, but it can also put you in that flow state.
Into the alpha brainwave state.
Exactly.
Wow.
So we have these superfoods, and now we're left wondering, like, what kind of format do we deliver it to people in? You know, we got capsules, we got tinctures, we got lozenges, we got gummies, and we were torn. So we just started surveying people. This is what we're going to deliver you. How do you want it? And to our surprise, most people responded saying, all of those things are like a chore in my day-to-day.
Yeah.
I have to remember to take these things. But I would love it if you could infuse these into some kind of morning caffeinated beverage so that it fits effortlessly into my day-to-day routine. And the data like matched this. 80% of people start their day with some kind of caffeinated beverage. So we were like, okay, we're going to create a instant superfood latte mix. And we didn't want to sacrifice flavor for functionality like you get with these like superfood shots. You know, you plug your nose and throw it back.
Right.
So we wanted it to taste as good as the coffee shop alternative, but better for you with functional ingredients as well as like low sugar. And we wanted people to obviously feel these functional benefits. So we launched a focus group, and the objective was we will not stop iterating this product until 65% of people say they feel the functional benefits and it tastes as good or if not better than the Starbucks equivalent.
Wow. So 65% of people that you survey or...
Yes.
Yeah.
And we surveyed about 50 people.
Okay.
And these were people who were like fanatical about golden milk, or mochas, matchas, et cetera, et cetera. So what I thought was going to be 6 weeks of R&D in my kitchen ended up requiring us contracting a natural chemist and ended up taking us about 15 months of R&D until we hit that objective.
Wow.
So
I think that was right around when you and I met.
Yes.
You're going through that.
Exactly. I think you had tried the golden milk right when we had finished the recipe.
Right. Yeah.
So we ended up formulating a golden milk, which is like a turmeric ginger with some cinnamon undertones, raw cacao, matcha with ceremonial grade matcha from Japan, and then a chai latte, very cinnamon forward chai latte based on some recipes from India. And we officially launched May 17th. And we could not have anticipated the response that we got.
Seems like it, man.
Some of the testimonials that we've heard, I mean, some of them are as little as, hey, I used to drink 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day, and now I just drink 1 superfood latte. Like, that's great. We're saving people money, providing them more sustained energy.
Yeah.
In other cases, people are like, I have been looking for an alternative to Adderall for years.
Wow.
And if this delivers, then this will be it. And sure enough, they come back and they're like, I want 4 bags. It doesn't provide exactly the same benefits as Adderall, but it provides enough benefits and is less intrusive. And then perhaps most profound, especially with like kind of my relationship to the product, is its impact on stress and anxiety.
Right.
So we had met this one gentleman who had been looking for natural alternatives to Xanax to support his stress and anxiety. And he'd actually tried GABA and synthetic GABA. And I had educated him around, nope, synthetic GABA is different than this natural GABA. Try this and let me know what you think. And now he swears by it. He says nothing natural has affected his mental health like this. Like nothing natural has impacted his stress and anxiety like a latte has.
Wow.
And
that's
then
huge.
Just recently, and the lattes aren't formulated to be an alternative to antidepressants by any means. But just recently, we had this girl who had told us she had stopped taking her antidepressants just because she forgot to get a refill. And typically when that happens, she deals with some withdrawals. And she said since drinking these lattes, she was no longer dealing with withdrawals and no longer needed her antidepressants.
Wow.
And she went to her doctor, a conventional psychiatrist, and he was like, listen, this isn't something that I often like recommend in my practice,
Yeah.
but if these superfood lattes are working for you, then don't stop. So
Wow.
there's
To come from a conventional psychiatrist, that's
exactly
a big statement.
Can you imagine going to your psychiatrist and saying you're anxious and he says, hey, drink this latte?
Right.
It's like profound and somewhat humorous.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's a convenient way to get these functional benefits. It's already like kind of built into your morning routine versus popping a handful of pills.
Yeah.
So
it's huge.
In conclusion, like our big focuses with this product are being radically transparent about what's in there.
Yeah.
And we see so many products out there with proprietary blends, and from an educated consumer standpoint who actually comb through these clinical studies, it's like, I want to know if there's 100 milligrams of GABA in there or 2 milligrams of GABA to understand if this is actually going to provide me any benefits.
Right.
That gets us to the second point, being like very clinically based. If study says 100 milligrams is effective, we use 100 milligrams.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, we want to deliver you something that actually works. And then part of it, I think this should be built into every business's business model these days, but is sustainability. And for us in particular, like we can't do what we do with this if we didn't have these superfoods that grow at our feet. So we're doing everything that we can to like lower our environmental footprint, from packaging made from recycled plastics to organically grown ingredients, and hopefully sometime soon regeneratively grown ingredients, to compostable mailers and everything in between.
It's huge. It's a huge initiative, I think, for a lot of companies, but it makes perfect sense for a company like yourself. Like you said, you can't offer this product without nature.
Exactly.
At least not in the way that you currently are. Especially when you talk about things like GABA and the difference between natural GABA and synthesized GABA.
Yeah.
And it makes perfect sense for you to not only have a focus on sustainability for the sake of like, oh, this is something we believe in, and from a PR standpoint, it looks good, but also it's critical to your mission as a company and what you offer and what you're all about. So
100%.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's amazing, man. What would you say, like, in terms of, this is a little bit more into entrepreneurship and building out a business. I'm sure you've learned a lot over the last couple of years, right?
Of course,
a lot of trial and error, a lot of things that worked, a lot of things that didn't work, from the product itself to branding to market research, all of the R&D that you've done. What would you say are some of like at least one maybe big takeaway or lesson learned that that you could share in terms of like what you really have learned in this whole journey as an entrepreneur, as a business owner?
Yeah, I think it's a couple different things. And one is so cliche, but it's so true. And it's like doing something that you're ultimately passionate about and fulfilled by, because during those 15 months of R&D, it's like, are we ever going to get this to the finish line and get something live? And if I didn't have that passion for like plant medicine as a tool for mental health and ultimately like making an impact on people, I would have thrown in the towel in a heartbeat.
Totally.
And that continues to like push me through the hard days, the long days and whatnot. And now that we're officially live, I hear these testimonials and I understand we're making an impact on people's lives. So it allows me just to keep on going.
It's huge.
And the second thing is just try a bunch of different things. Right out of the gates, we were like, how do we get this product into people's hands? And our marketing strategy literally was, let's throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And for us, that was events. We do 6 events a week. Come this spring, we're going to be doing 25 to 60 events per week.
Whoa.
And it's a lot, but we see results from a business perspective, and then from like a customer perspective, we get to build these relationships with our customers, and then they come back and we get to hear their testimonials and try and advise them in other parts of their life wherever we feel fit. So I'd say that those are my two biggest takeaways to date.
Yeah. There's a few things I want to touch on there. First off, in terms of this idea of imperfect action, I think that's one of the biggest things as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, is like throw stuff up on the wall, see what sticks, especially when you're first starting out, because you really don't know, right? Like you could read every book on the shelf, you could watch YouTube videos and listen to podcasts about business and entrepreneurship. Some of that might work, some of it might not work. But at the end of the day, what's going to work for you and your company is honestly by trial and error, like literally seeing what works for you, because it could be totally different for somebody else.
Yeah.
And then I also noticed, it seems like you guys are doing a lot of, you mentioned events. It seems like you're doing a lot of like local farmers markets. And I think that's such a perfect match for what you guys do. Is like you said, you can be there in person. People can come up to your booth, try, sample. Now they have tried it and tasted it, and they're like, dang, this tastes really good. And there's all these benefits to it.
Yeah.
And then it plays in really nicely with your kind of sustainability model of, we're a natural product and these are, alternative options for mental wellness.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really brilliant way to go about it.
Yeah. No, the events have been fun. Again, they're long days, early mornings, late nights. But just being able to engage with these people who in some cases are like really, really suffering and looking for a natural tool, and being able to kind of talk them through that and educate them around some of these alternative therapies is just hugely rewarding.
For sure. You also mentioned this idea of being passionate about what you're doing. When it comes to the success of a business, having that idea of passion around it. Otherwise, you'll probably just throw in the white flag or white towel or whatever the saying is.
Yeah.
Or throw in the towel. That ties in nicely with what you were talking about in terms of the different pillars of health and a healthy lifestyle is purpose.
Yeah.
And that to me is when you can wake up with a purpose, and as cliche as it might sound, but when you have a purpose and then on top of that, you're getting feedback from your customers that they're seeing real impact and real change because of what you're delivering. That just kind of keeps you going. So,
And I mean, on the topic of like passion and purpose, it's like for us, it's kind of easy to preach about because we've found that.
right.
For someone who's hunting for that, it's the $1 million question. It's what is
Yeah.
my purpose? How do I find fulfillment in this life? And I don't think there's like any right answer to that question. What I would implore people to do is just try a bunch of different things.
I was just going to say the same thing.
I mean, like before college, after college, whatever the case may be, like do a bunch of different internships in various different industries. Try a bunch of odd jobs and see what you enjoy doing the most. See what you find the most fulfillment in doing, and then double down on that.
Yeah.
Just have experiences. You're not going to find fulfillment or purpose or passion sitting on your couch watching Seinfeld.
unless that's something you're really passionate about. Right?
Perhaps, yeah. Unless that sparks some kind of interest in videography and filmmaking and whatnot. So
I totally know what you mean, but then don't forget, like we live in a world now where there's a lot of ways to make money and build a career, whether that's a YouTube channel, a podcast, right? Like I'm sure there's a podcast about Seinfeld. There's something similar to Seinfeld, right? Like there's stand-up comedy, and but I absolutely I agree with what you're saying.
But the difference is action versus inaction.
Totally.
I've had a few friends who are passionate about filmmaking, and they watch a ton of films, but it's like that's not going to translate to action. You can't. Maybe there's a career out there where you can make money and a living watching movies and whatnot, but
I think there is actually. It's very rare to get, but I think you can.
Well, yeah, it might be a competitive job, but at the end of the day, it's like, learn, absorb as much knowledge, and then go out there and act on it.
There's a huge difference between, and I have to catch myself on this topic quite a bit because I love learning. Like I love reading books, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, attending webinars, and there's just so many ways to learn online nowadays or through books. But there's a difference between sitting there and reading and then putting the book down and then not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
And then reading the book and then actually taking action on what you're learning from that book.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to just constantly consume and learn and take in more information and feel good about yourself and be like, oh, I achieved something because I watched this YouTube video today, or I listened to this podcast,
Yeah.
but then not actually take action on it. So that's the key
Absolutely.
difference there is take what you learn and then go quickly take
Yeah.
action.
And with many of these things, podcasts, books, whatever the case may be, you only really absorb maybe 5 to 10% of it.
Yeah.
So when I do read, I annotate. So if
Same.
anyone's like, "Hey, can I borrow that book?" I'm like, "Yeah, you're gonna get all my like mind garbage from
Totally.
there." But I try to like summarize each chapter, and then that's like my takeaway. I can always turn back to it and be like, "Okay, this is what I need to act on. This is like my big takeaway from this 40-page chapter," and try to turn that into action.
Yeah, 100%. We've talked, actually, this is kind of full circle here. We started conversation around plant medicine and psychedelics specifically. I want to bring conversation back to that because I know you have experience. You shared your psilocybin experience when you were going through grief. How does psilocybin play a role in mental health today? I know there's so much talk about it nowadays. It seems to be like a very trendy conversation. It's something I talk about quite a bit on my podcast. But what does the role of psilocybin play in mental health in terms of experience for each individual, right? Like there's a number of different ways you can use psychedelics. You know, if you look back at history, a lot of times it's been more so like party use. It seems like in the last 10 or so years, we're really starting to understand how it plays into mental health.
Yeah.
And whether that's a trip like you were talking about where it's, I don't know, 2 to 5 grams, what somebody would call a heroic dose, where you go through a couple hours of this journey to heal, to explore, to better understand yourself, or maybe microdosing. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about my experience with psilocybin and microdosing. But what do you see going on right now? I know we definitely talked a bit about psilocybin and mental health. But do you have anything else you wanted to share with like what we're seeing in today's world with psychedelics and as it relates to mental health?
Yeah, I mean, based on my own experience with it relatively recently, I mean, within the last 4 years, I think it's amazing that they're finally kind of coming out of the shadows. And what's wild is in the 70s, 60s, 70s, they were pretty rigorously researched. And
Right.
back then, we knew a lot of what we now know, like what's a lot being preached about, addiction, mental health, et cetera, et cetera. But then
the door was closed.
Yeah, kind of counterculture picked them up, and then the government closed the door on them. And the door is still closed, but there is more research going on these days, and we're beginning to learn more and more about the impact that they can have, again, on grief, addiction, mental health. I mean, I think microdosing is being studied for like ADD and ADHD as well. So it's quite profound, and I look forward to the day where we have these like treatment centers where people can go and have this like guided experience to process whatever it is they need to process.
Yeah.
I do truly believe that these psychedelics or magic mushrooms or whatever it is that they legalize is going to be the future of mental health care, especially for these more severe cases of mental health issues.
Yeah.
Now, there are some drawbacks. Like, I understand that they're not great for people with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. But, I mean, the research on it is very, very profound. I mean, addiction is oftentimes like a mental health issue. And I think, what's the statistic? Like, the leading cause of mortality for men 18 to 40 is opioid overdoses.
Wow.
Profound.
Just relatively recently, right?
Within the last, I think, 5 to 10 years. Yeah. And the studies, I think it was psilocybin that they were studying. And I think it was just one high dose, 3.5 gram to 5 gram experience. Well, I'll backtrack here. They took a group of people who were addicted to cigarettes, and they had tried numerous times to quit, but they just couldn't. And I think they gave them 1, maybe 2 high dose psilocybin experiences. And then they when they went back to them 8 months later, I think it was, 80% of them had not picked up another cigarette since that one initial experience.
Wow.
So that's addiction. And then with treatment-resistant depression, I believe that they've been able to find results, complete remission in majority of participants in these studies.
Mm.
And I forget the statistics on grief, but that was also quite profound.
Wow.
But at the end of the day, I mean, like I touched on earlier, it depends on like your mindset going into it. Are you like ready for this? Your setting? I mean, being at a concert is totally different than being on a couch in like a therapy center.
Right.
And your intention. I mean, so many people go take these drugs and they're like, my intention is to have fun at Lollapalooza.
Right.
Versus when you use it therapeutically, it's like my intention is to process the grief of losing my father, or my intention is to overcome my addiction to opiates, or my intention is to process this treatment-resistant depression that I've been diagnosed with. So I think it's quite profound, and I'm excited to see where it goes in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, the dominoes are falling. More and more cities are decriminalizing it, and it seems like it's kind of following the same path that cannabis had.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be where it's heading. And it is, it's an exciting time in that space when you look at it from the mental health perspective. I would say it's like the last 2 years is when I've had more experiences or started having experience with psilocybin, and I've had a number. I could probably count on my two hands the number of times I've had an experience with psilocybin, 1 to 2 grams. I haven't really gone above that, what you would call a heroic dose. My experience is more with microdosing, which on and off for the last year, I microdose a couple times a week. You know, that's anywhere from 0.1 to 0.3 grams of psilocybin. And I notice, and a lot of other people I think that microdose psilocybin will report that they feel more alert and focused, right? You were talking a little bit about like that alternative to ADHD medicine. I noticed that, like, I definitely feel like I can be a little bit more, not that it's like a productivity hack, but I do find myself being more focused throughout the day. The biggest thing for me, aside from that, is by the end of the day, I kind of look back and oftentimes throughout the day, I forget that I took a microdose, right? Like actually this morning I took a microdose, and up until I just talked about this now, I forgot that I took the microdose, right?
Yeah.
So that's how minimal it is in terms of the awareness of it. You're not feeling like you're tripping or high or anything. But on a day that I microdose, I usually get to that end of the day and I look back and it's like, wow, that was a pretty good day. Like I felt like I was focused, I was alert, I was present with my conversations that I was having. I was more patient, which are all huge things for me. Like, not that this is a cure to everything and like a pill that you just take that fixes all of your problems. But for me, it was like before experiencing or having taking a psilocybin microdose, I would be pretty impatient. So those are the things that I'm mostly noticing that I didn't necessarily experience before, right? Like being more patient now, whereas before I would be like super impatient or not even focus or listen to what people were saying in a conversation. So that kind of, I guess, is more of like an awareness piece. And then I do notice too that I feel more loving. And I know that sounds kind of mushy, but there's something there, and I don't know enough. I'll admit, like I enjoy and get a lot out of psychedelics, but I'm no expert in the field. So I don't really understand what's happening there on a scientific level of the compound and what's making me feel a little bit more open-hearted and more loving. But I do sense that I have this, there's something there that I connect with people better.
Yeah.
Right. Like I see another human as another human being, which is huge right now when we look at the state of the world and you look at social media and the news cycle and the divisiveness around it. And then you get into like politics, and it just seems like in the last, 5, 6, 7 years, maybe partly from social media and a number of other things, we've gotten so divided as a country and as a society, right? It's
Yeah.
like me versus you, us versus them, right versus left. And that's scary to me. Like what I see going on right now, it's pretty scary. So the fact that I can be aware of that and be like, yo, we're humans, man. Like it doesn't matter your race, your color of your skin, your religion, your background, where you grew up in the world. We're brothers and sisters. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm getting all of this from psychedelics, because there's a number of other things I've worked on in the last few years for self-care and self-love, breath work, and just taking care of my mental health, right? Going on walks, just a number of things. But it's pretty awesome to look back and be like, whoa, I've seen a lot of transformation in the last couple of years. And I think psychedelics have played a pretty big role in that. And I hear similar stories from other people, and it's promising. It's an exciting time. Like I want more of this for everybody. And I think we all do. Like I think we all want a better world and a more loving world, more patience, more kindness, more compassion. These all sound like buzzwords that people throw around, but when you experience it and live it, man, it's like, it's so life-changing.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time before it's available for everyone.
Yeah.
I just hope that people use it mindfully so that we don't get into the issue that made it illegal in the first place.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
It's a really good point.
Microdose, to your point about feeling more loving, I mean, that was my experience as well. Like it almost just sparks this zest for life that you can't escape, whether it be just thinking about your family or friends or kind of what you get to do on a day-to-day basis, or just the ability to be able to actually live every day. Like you just think about these things that are so granular on your average day. And when you're under the influence of some of these compounds, it's just quite profound. But with microdosing too, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth in describing the experience as your head hitting the pillow and you look back on the day and you're like, today was a good day.
Right.
And the misunderstanding with microdosing is, to people that have never tried it or aren't really that familiar with these compounds, they're like, what? You're tripping during the day?
Right.
It's like, no, this is a sub-perceptual dose. You have, to your point, you forget that you actually took it.
Right.
But you're able to feel more loving, feel more compassionate, have more focus, be more stable in terms of your mood. And in my experience, it's like I find myself able to kind of think better and like grab words that I typically might be forgetful of. You know, when you're mid-conversation and you stumble over some word, you're like, what is that word? But when I microdose, or even shameless product plug, when I drink these, it's like
I was just gonna say,
I'm able to like grab these words and just continue on with the conversation.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting study. They compared, this is your brain on normally, and this is your brain on psilocybin. And you could see that it's like 90% active compared to like 20 or 30% active when you're sober.
Right.
Or when you're not under the influence.
And is that because the neurotransmitters are more active and you're creating new neural pathways?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Is there anything with psilocybin coupled with Blossom? And I've had a few other kind of blends, you can call them. Like I'll do psilocybin with lion's mane.
Yeah.
I know is a popular one. Is there anything there that you have researched yet in terms of what you have in here, right? The guarana, the L-theanine, the gaba, coupled with psilocybin. Is there anything going on there?
So from like a clinical perspective, no. From like a qualitative perspective, like my own experiences and some of the other experiences I've heard from people, I believe so. My hypothesis is yes, that there's like kind of some synergistic effects that come when you pair psilocybin with some of these other things. My hypothesis is that it kind of exacerbates or emphasizes the effects of some of these other things. I know Paul Stamets, mushroom guru, he preaches about lion's mane, psilocybin, and I think niacin for like regenerating neurons and just kind of overall cognitive health. I know there's this company up in Canada, and I'm gonna botch on their name, but they do these, like, capsules of psilocybin as well as some other, like, adaptogens and amino acids, and based on some of the testimonials I've read there, people are getting, like, profound relief compared to just psilocybin alone.
Hmm.
From my own experience, sleep has plagued me for a couple of years now, and, when pairing psilocybin with L-theanine, valerian root, and GABA, I tracked it on my Whoop, which, like, measures your sleep scores,
Mhm.
and I had, like, 2 to 3 times as much REM sleep and deep sleep, which was significantly higher than that formulation without psilocybin.
Wow. What was that
Yeah.
formulation again? It was psilocybin and
So usually it's just what I drink is valerian root, L-theanine, and GABA,
what's
which
valerian root?
valerian root is a root, I forget exactly where it's from, but it's, like, got very sedative properties to
Okay.
it. And then
GABA.
GABA, amino acid from kimchi, and L-theanine, amino acid from green tea.
Yep.
And when I paired that with psilocybin, I noticed that the effects of those remedies were exacerbated.
Wow. You would get deeper sleep, get into an REM state.
Exactly.
Wow.
But ultimately, like, it's sleep hygiene
Right.
over everything else. You know, this formula can perhaps be like a reminder, or a ritual, if you will.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, like, you need to go to bed at the same time,
Yeah.
wake up at the same time. Try and have some kind of wind down activity, whether it be reading a book, meditating, practicing yoga,
Mm.
something away from technology.
Yeah.
And then more recently, what I've been trying is Huberman's morning routine, where he wakes up and gets sunlight first
Yeah.
thing in the morning. And I found that it, like, completely sets my circadian rhythm. And now every time I wake up, my body's like, "Where's the sun? I need
Right.
some sunlight."
Totally. Yeah. I think he recommends on a sunny day to get at least 10 minutes of some sun exposure when you first wake up, somewhere around 10 minutes. And then I think on an overcast or cloudy day, like more like 30 minutes a walk. I've been doing that as well. It's easy for me. I think you have a dog as well, right?
Yeah, kind of.
Sort of. You have a dog that lives in your home.
Yeah.
So with having a dog, it makes it pretty easy for me because I have to go out on a walk anyhow.
Yeah.
First thing in the morning. So it's kind of nice to know I'm getting that benefit of going out. I mean, I'm getting exercise, getting walk in, getting fresh air, sunlight, and yeah, I noticed the same thing too. Like on a sunny day, I'll try to go for about 15-minute walk. And then on a cloudy day, a little bit longer. But it absolutely helps with that circadian rhythm where
Yeah.
I feel like I know I'm more aware and I'm just more present to waking up at a consistent time in the morning and then having a consistent bedtime.
Yeah.
And that to me is huge. Like when you can go to bed on a regular basis at the same time, wake up, and then now it's to the point where I don't really even need an alarm in the morning because my circadian rhythm is set and I know what time to wake up. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, sleep is huge.
Yeah, while we're talking about sleep, there's a number of other, and I think you mentioned earlier in the conversation, these other pillars for mental wellness, lifestyle. So maybe you can touch a little bit more on how nutrition and movement, even things like community and purpose, mindfulness. We talked about sleep, all these things we kind of have touched on in this conversation, but maybe you can touch on a little bit more with
Yeah. So
each of those
those
pillars.
5, 6 pillars again are nutrition, exercise, community, mindfulness, sleep, and purpose.
Mhm.
So nutrition is fundamental, but also very individual. I mean, with allergies and food preferences and what seasonal items and whatnot. So, I mean, I don't think there's really one size fits all when it comes to nutrition.
Mhm.
I think it's not as much of eat tons of this, it's more so eat less of this, these
Mhm.
things that are causing you chronic inflammation and whatnot. Um, with exercise, we touched on it earlier. It doesn't have to be this whole big grandiose thing. You don't need that gym membership at
Right.
the very expensive gym down the street. You don't need to start bodybuilding. I mean, find some kind of movement, 20 minutes a day, 4 days a week,
Yep.
according to the studies that I've seen. And then mindfulness, I mean, you know better than I about the impact that it can have on, like, your overall nervous system and kind of being more stable and present throughout the day and kind of navigating things a bit better as things are thrown at you
Yeah.
and you kinda come across things that were, like, unexpected.
Mm.
Um, and then community. There's some studies that have been done on this, on, like, community's impact on mental health, and there was this doctor that I heard speak, and he likened loneliness, being lonely, not having community,
Mm.
to being as bad for you as smoking 15 cigarettes a day,
Oh my God.
which is quite profound. And I mean,
Yeah.
you can't look at, like, people's mortality and be like, he died of loneliness.
Right.
But there is correlation between it.
Yeah.
Um,
Do we know what's happening there when someone is lonely? I mean, I imagine there's a number of things happening to their health, but do we know specifically what's going on there? Obviously, it's a mental health thing. But I would love to, I don't know, maybe it's something we both need to look into more,
yeah,
but
there's a hormone, and I know cacao stimulates it. I know that mushrooms can stimulate it. It's that loving feeling
yeah,
that you get.
yeah,
And I'm blanking on the name of that hormone. I
it's
think
okay.
it starts with an A, but it it's that hormone that these people lack, is my understanding
When you're
of
lonely.
it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's wild.
Yeah.
Well, that would play into this idea of longevity. Like if you look at any of the blue zones, it was Dan Buettner that has, he's written a few books now about blue zones.
Those are places where people notoriously live
Yeah,
longer.
yep. I think there's 6 or 7 throughout the world. The one in the US is Lacoma, California. There's one in Japan. There's Italy,
I think there might be one in Greece.
Greece,
Right?
correct? Yep. A few others across the world, but they've done studies on these different areas of the longest living people throughout the world. And they're seeing that these different communities, the 6 or 7 that I just mentioned, they're living very long, right? Like pretty much that entire region. Their average is like over 100 years. And so he started studying, and he and now I'm sure several other people have studied these regions on what their lifestyle is. And I'm sure it's all of these things you talked about, right? Of course, nutrition, exercise, things like mindfulness, but I know community is a huge part of that.
Yeah.
You know, where they're getting together as a community to have meals, to socialize, right? To play cards or whatever it may be, bocce ball. Just having that social aspect, to have conversations, to laugh. I mean, that's a whole other topic, is laughter as medicine, right?
Yeah.
And it's just really interesting to see how something that we need as human beings, as you're talking about lack of community and being lonely and being detrimental to your health, it's something that isn't really talked about a ton.
Yeah.
But when you look at, if you kind of uncover the curtain there and see what's really going on, it's like, oh yeah, if you're lonely, you're going to be unhealthy.
Yeah.
When you have the opposite side of that, and you're in a social environment, a community-based environment, it's so important for our health and our happiness.
Absolutely. And a trend that we saw during COVID was people were lonely, even though
Totally.
they've got their phones, they're on Zoom and whatnot.
Right.
And what we learned then was, like, this doesn't mean community per se. You've
Totally.
got 40,000 followers on Instagram, or you're in Zoom meetings with all of your friends. Like, there's some science to being here now, sitting across from the table from you, being able to pump fists and whatever
Right.
the case may be, being able to, like, watch your body language and whatnot. And there's definitely something there as well.
It's such an interesting point. I think we're now more connected than we've ever been before through technology, social media, email, text, phone calls, whatever. But we're also lonelier than we've ever been.
And you see that you walk through a high school or a college or wherever, and you see all these people, and they're all glued to their phones. And honestly, I'm victim to it
Totally.
too. I'm no better than anyone else here, but my friends and I, we always ask, like, we'll be sitting on our phones, like scrolling through TikTok or whatever the case may be, and we're like, what did our parents do when they were our age and they didn't have these phones and they were
Right.
sitting on the couch? You know, they were conversing. They were maybe they were out walking around or doing something. Yeah, it's just we're all around each other. There's no shortage of people to build community with.
Yeah.
It's just we have these distractions to building that community.
I just had a podcast recording maybe a month ago with his name's Julian Guterlei. He is a life coach, transformational coach. He has a podcast of his own. I've worked with him. I worked with him last summer as my own life coach. So I had him on my podcast. I think it was about a month ago. And he shared something that he heard on Rich Roll's podcast. I forget who the guest was, but anyhow, this guest that was on Rich Roll's podcast was talking about this idea of going on a 12-hour walk without our phone.
Yeah. Wow.
So just going out and literally walking for 12 hours, and you don't even necessarily have to do it for 12. You could do 6 hours, which sounds very challenging and daunting. Like, oh my God, I'm going to be gone my whole day and have no phone on me. Like, what am I going to do? Right? Like, that's what probably most people would think in our world. And when you think about it, like when he shared that story with me, I kind of laughed because I was like, what do you think our ancestors that lived 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, heck, 25 years ago, right? Like pre-smartphone, they would probably be laughing at the conversation that we were having about going out for 6 hours or 12 hours without a phone. Like they'd literally be like, right. They're like, that's how we live our lives. Like, what are you talking about? But it's just wild to think like that is now the world we live in, that it's almost like a novelty. Like, oh my God, I have to go out without a phone and fill my time and, have thoughts, live with my thoughts and like maybe be creative and maybe come up with new ideas and maybe be out in nature and just live life the way we're meant to as human beings.
Now, the average person, if they leave home without this phone, it's like
you feel like you're naked. You feel like you're lost. Yeah,
exactly.
It's pretty crazy. Cool, man. This has been an amazing conversation. I do want to hear a little bit more about, just to kind of wrap things up and come full circle here, Blossom, where you're heading, the mission behind it, the vision behind it. You've made so much traction in the last year or so with your products and your branding and all the research you've done with it and everything, packaging. What is next for you? Like, where do you see the company going from here, given all the growth you've had really just in the last couple of months? But what's your vision for Blossom?
Yeah. Ultimately, I mean, it all focuses around natural medicine as a tool for mental wellness, educating, creating products around everyday mental wellness needs, whether it be preventative or to kind of whether you're in the heat of it. So there are a few other like functions that we'd like to touch on from a product standpoint. But we also want to, again, bridge this access gap where I recognize this isn't a magic pill, and I'd never ever want to position this as a magic pill. Everyone is different. Everyone has different needs. But you can't go and see a holistic psychiatrist to determine what your needs are and ultimately find solutions to those needs. So the more long-term vision is to kind of digitize that process where we can provide people these personalized treatment plans based on their personal needs. Dan, do you exercise? What does your nutrition look like? Have you found your purpose? How's your sleep hygiene? And then how's your like stress, anxiety, mood, sleep, etc.? And then ultimately kind of provide you recommendations based on science to help you overcome that.
Wow.
Now I know that it can never be as effective as a one-on-one with a holistic psychiatrist,
Sure.
Especially if they have some tests that they can potentially run on you. But for people that cannot afford those holistic psychiatrist services, or they live in rural Indiana or Iowa, or wherever the case may be, and their nearest holistic psychiatrist is in Boston.
Yeah.
It just kind of shrinks that access gap.
Yeah.
And one day, I mean, as the curtain falls with psilocybin, I hope that we can kind of set up these centers where we can support people's needs on that front, help them through some of these more severe conditions. But we're 5 months in now since our official launch, and we've only just scratched the surface, but it's been a very, very fulfilling 5 months to kind of see that what we set out to do is actually come to fruition, both from a product standpoint and from, like, the testimonial standpoint.
Yeah.
Like, we're actually making an impact, and I'm thrilled about that.
Yeah, man. It's been amazing to see the growth, like you said, just in the last 5 months. I have no doubt you're going to where you're heading is something really special, and I know with your mission and your purpose behind it, you're going to continue to make an impact in the space. So, thank you for joining me today. I would like to conclude here. Where can people learn more if they're interested in finding your product?
Yeah, so drinkblossom.com is the website, and then our Instagram handle is drinkblossom.co. And then we're popping up at some events here in Chicago, Minneapolis, and then Southern California this spring. And we'll be posting those schedules online so people can come try it, talk to us about the story, ask us any questions, or send us a message online.
I love it, man. And just a personal testimony for people listening and watching, definitely get Blossom. Like, just try it. Get one package. Try it. How long does this last? Like maybe a month, maybe last
Yeah,
couple
depends
weeks?
how often you drink it. 10 servings. It's
Yeah.
about 10 drinks.
So get a bag and try it for yourself. It is delicious. I feel all the things we've talked about, right? Like more alert and more focused, more bliss in my day. So I can't recommend it enough. So
I appreciate that. I
Yeah, man.
appreciate you giving me a voice today.
absolutely. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.